Billionaire panics after losing 977 million until he finds a poor 7-year-old girl pretending to have dinner with empty plates. What happens next is shocking. Before we dive in, tap like and write where you're watching from and a song that comforts you. The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of Richard Blackstone's penthouse office, 47 floors above Manhattan's relentless chaos. The sound echoed through the suffocating silence like a death knell for everything he'd painstakingly built over 35 grueling years of sacrifice, determination, and unwavering ambition. $977 million gone. Vanished completely in the digital equivalent of a devastating house fire, leaving behind nothing but smoldering ash, shattered dreams, and the unbearably bitter taste of absolute, crushing failure. "Sir, the board is demanding immediate answers and explanations." His secretary Margaret's voice trembled through the intercom system, barely containing her own rising panic as she witnessed the spectacular collapse of what had once seemed an unshakable empire. "The investors are pulling out faster than we can possibly count them." CNN, Forbes, Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal are all camped in our lobby with their cameras and microphones, demanding official statements about the bankruptcy filing, the failed merger negotiations, and the catastrophic cyber attack that completely wiped out our entire digital infrastructure overnight. The phones haven't stopped ringing for 6 straight hours, and the building security is struggling to contain the growing crowd of reporters. Richard's hands shook uncontrollably as he loosened his expensive Italian silk tie with trembling fingers, the same elegant piece his beloved late wife Catherine had lovingly given him for their 20th wedding anniversary exactly 8 years ago, back when the world still made sense and love still lived warmly in his heart. At 58 years old, with silver threading through his once dark hair and deep lines etched by decades of corporate warfare, he'd never in his wildest nightmares imagined watching his life's greatest achievement crumble in real time on every major financial news channel across America and beyond. Blackstone Industries had been far more than just another company in his portfolio. It had been his legacy, his monument to human achievement and innovation, his proof that the American dream still existed for those willing to sacrifice everything for success. Revolutionary technology patents worth billions of dollars, state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities spanning 3 continents, cutting-edge research laboratories that had produced world-changing innovations, and 12,000 loyal, dedicated employees who trusted him completely with their futures, their families' security, their children's college funds, and their retirement dreams. The breathtaking panoramic view from his corner office window had once filled him with immense pride, satisfaction, and a deep sense of accomplishment. Manhattan stretched out below like a glittering kingdom he'd helped build through sheer force of will, each gleaming skyscraper representing years of struggle, sacrifice, and ultimate triumph over impossible odds. Today, that same magnificent view mocked him mercilessly, cruelly. Somewhere in those bustling streets, 47 floors below, were thousands of hard-working families, depending on paychecks that might never materialize again. Innocent children whose college funds had evaporated overnight with his company's catastrophic stock collapse. Elderly retirees whose carefully planned pension funds had been inexorably tied to his success and were now nothing more than worthless paper and broken promises. The crushing weight of that enormous responsibility pressed down relentlessly on his shoulders like an unbearable physical force, making each breath labored and painful, making clear thought nearly impossible as the full magnitude of the disaster truly began to sink into his consciousness. His chest tightened with each struggling breath as waves of guilt, shame, and overwhelming despair washed over him in relentless succession. This wasn't merely his personal failure. This was the complete destruction of thousands of innocent lives, cherished dreams, and carefully planned futures that had depended entirely on his leadership, his vision, his promises. His phone buzzed incessantly with the fury of an angry hornet's nest. High-powered corporate lawyers demanding emergency meetings, ruthless creditors threatening immediate and devastating lawsuits, investigative reporters circling like hungry vultures, sensing fresh carrion in the corporate wasteland he'd inadvertently created. The red light on his mahogany desk phone blinked relentlessly, hypnotically, each flash representing another precious piece of his carefully constructed world falling apart in spectacular, irreversible fashion. Richard methodically turned off everything in his office with trembling hands that seemed to belong to someone else. Phone, computer, the impressive wall of monitors that had been tracking his company's agonizing death spiral throughout what felt like the longest, most torturous morning of his entire existence. The sudden silence that followed felt deafening, oppressive, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant, mocking hum of traffic far below in the streets where normal people lived normal lives untouched by his corporate catastrophe. He grabbed his coat with movements that felt mechanical, robotic, as if his devastated soul had already vacated his body, leaving behind only an empty shell going through the meaningless motions of existence. The elevator descended in tomb-like silence, each passing floor marking another step away from the confident, successful man he'd been when he'd arrived that morning, full of desperate hope and grim determination to somehow save his crumbling empire through sheer force of will. By the time he reached the gleaming marble lobby with its imposing Blackstone Industries logo, soon to be removed by court order and replaced with auction notices, Richard Blackstone, the celebrated billionaire, was gone forever, erased as completely as if he'd never existed. What remained was nothing more than a broken, hollow shell of a human being walking slowly into the cold October afternoon, searching desperately for something he couldn't name but knew he desperately needed to find before the suffocating darkness consuming his soul completed its terrible work. Central Park stretched before him like an oasis of green tranquility in the concrete jungle, a blessed sanctuary where the city's relentless, punishing pace seemed to slow just enough for broken souls to catch their breath and perhaps find some small measure of peace among the ancient trees and winding pathways. Richard walked aimlessly through the park's meandering paths, his $1,000 Italian leather shoes crunching through fallen leaves that reminded him of infinitely better days when autumn meant joyful family gatherings, excited holiday planning, and the simple pleasure of changing seasons rather than financial apocalypse and personal ruin. The crisp October air carried winter's approaching promise, and families strolled past in the golden afternoon light that filtered through the magnificent canopy of trees overhead. Fathers pushed strollers with infinite patience, while pointing out squirrels and pigeons to wide-eyed toddlers who squealed with pure delight at every small discovery. Mothers chased laughing children through towering piles of freshly fallen leaves, their carefree joy and infectious laughter creating a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness consuming Richard's battered soul. Elderly couples shared quiet, intimate conversations on weathered park benches, their faces relaxed and genuinely content, hands intertwined with the comfortable intimacy that comes from decades of shared love, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. He envied their apparent simplicity with a desperation that surprised him with its intensity. When had he last felt such uncomplicated contentment, such pure satisfaction with life's simple pleasures? When had his existence become so completely consumed with stock prices, board meetings, quarterly earnings reports, and shareholder expectations that he'd forgotten what genuine human connection actually felt like? Their obvious satisfaction with ordinary lives, unmarked by the crushing pressure of corporate empires and stockholder expectations, seemed like an alien concept from some distant, more peaceful universe. The children's playground came into view ahead, bustling with the joyful chaos of afternoon playtime that spoke to innocence and hope he'd forgotten existed. The sweet sound of innocent laughter filled the crisp air, pure, unfiltered happiness that Richard realized with growing sadness he hadn't experienced in his own life for far too many years. Children climbed colorful jungle gyms with fearless abandon, while parents watched protectively from nearby benches, their faces relaxed and genuinely content in ways Richard had completely forgotten were possible for adults in the modern world. He found himself inexorably drawn to an empty bench that offered a perfect vantage point for observing the entire scene, settling onto the cold metal with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the accumulated weight of his entire 58 years of existence, struggle, and ultimate failure. Maybe watching other people's uncomplicated happiness would somehow remind him what genuine joy felt like after so many years of chasing success at the expense of everything else that truly mattered. That's when he saw them, and in that single life-changing moment, everything in Richard's broken world shifted dramatically on its axis, setting in motion events that would transform all their lives in ways none of them could possibly imagine. Tucked away in a quiet corner of the playground, partially hidden behind a massive oak tree whose ancient branches created a natural shelter from both wind and curious eyes, 3 small figures sat in a perfect circle around what appeared to be an elaborate picnic setup, complete with careful attention to every detail. But something was profoundly, heartbreakingly wrong with the beautiful picture unfolding before his disbelieving eyes. The children were holding plastic spoons with the serious concentration and dignified focus of fine diners at an exclusive restaurant, moving them carefully and deliberately from empty paper plates to their mouths, chewing air with the kind of refined etiquette usually reserved for 5-star establishments. Their performance was so convincing, so detailed and utterly committed, that for a brief moment Richard wondered if he was witnessing some elaborate theatrical game rather than recognizing it for the desperate survival strategy it clearly was. Their clothes told an unmistakable story of grinding poverty and heartbreaking hardship that no child should ever have to endure. Everything was obviously too big, clearly hand-me-downs that had seen multiple previous owners and countless washings, and their worn shoes had gaping holes that allowed the autumn chill to seep in and freeze their small feet. Yet despite their obviously desperate circumstances, they maintained their imaginary feast with such remarkable grace, dignity, and meticulous attention to proper etiquette that Richard found himself leaning forward, completely captivated and emotionally overwhelmed by the scene. The oldest child, a girl who couldn't possibly be more than 7 years old, wore a faded yellow dress that had clearly seen much better days, but was meticulously clean and carefully mended with tiny, precise stitches that spoke of loving attention to detail and fierce pride despite poverty. Her long chestnut-brown hair was neatly braided with obvious care, despite its clear need for washing, and her striking green eyes sparkled with remarkable intelligence, wisdom, and determination that seemed impossibly advanced for someone so incredibly young. Beside her sat 2 identical boys who appeared to be around 5 years old, their matching Superman t-shirts worn thin with age and countless washings, but still proudly displaying the iconic symbol of hope and strength that seemed almost prophetic given their circumstances. Despite being obviously undernourished, all 3 children showed the unmistakable signs of chronic malnutrition and food insecurity. Their elaborate imaginary meal proceeded with remarkable dignity and ceremony that spoke eloquently to careful upbringing, deep family love, and unshakable values that poverty couldn't destroy. "Now remember very carefully, Tommy and Timmy," the remarkable little girl said, in a voice that carried wisdom, gentle authority, and loving leadership far beyond her tender years. We absolutely must eat all our vegetables before we can have even a tiny bite of dessert. Mama always told us that proper nutrition was the foundation of a healthy life and a strong mind, and we must honor her precious memory by taking excellent care of our bodies and treating them like the sacred gifts they truly are. And the twins nodded solemnly with touching seriousness, their small faces grave with concentration as they spooned invisible peas, carrots, and green beans into their mouths, with exaggerated expressions of distaste that somehow made their beloved sister giggle, a sound so pure, joyful, and infectious that Richard felt something crack open painfully in his chest, allowing blessed warmth to spread slowly through the cold emptiness that had consumed his heart throughout this terrible, life-changing day. "These green beans are particularly delicious and fresh today," the girl continued, with the serious tone and sophisticated vocabulary of a professional food critic conducting an important review. "And look how perfectly golden brown and beautifully seasoned our roasted chicken turned out. The herbs and spices are balanced just right. Not too salty, not too bland. Mama would be so incredibly proud of our cooking skills and how well we're taking care of each other despite everything we've been through." Richard watched in complete fascination and growing amazement as these three remarkable children effortlessly transformed abject poverty into abundance through nothing but pure imagination, unbreakable family love, and absolutely unshakable determination to survive with their dignity completely intact. The elaborate pretense continued with the girl. He desperately wanted to know her name, carefully portioning out invisible side dishes with mathematical precision that would impress any engineer, ensuring her beloved brothers received perfectly equal shares of everything while maintaining a running commentary about balanced nutrition, proper table manners, gratitude for life's blessings, and the critical importance of family unity in times of crisis. When was the last time he'd witnessed such pure, uncompromising grace in the face of seemingly impossible adversity? When had he last seen hope that absolutely refused to die despite circumstances that would completely break most adults? These extraordinary children were teaching him profound lessons about resilience, unconditional love, and the true meaning of wealth that his expensive Ivy League education and decades of corporate success had never even begun to approach or understand. "Emma," one of the twins said with touching hope in his young voice, "do you think we could please have some of that delicious chocolate cake now?" "I finished absolutely everything on my plate, even the vegetables I don't particularly like, and I used my napkin properly and remembered to say please and thank you just like Mama taught us before she went to heaven." The girl, Emma, what a beautiful, perfect name for such an extraordinary child, smiled with radiant joy that seemed to illuminate her entire face despite their desperate circumstances, creating a moment of pure magic that transformed their corner of the park into something sacred and wonderful. "Well, Tommy, you did eat everything very nicely and remembered all your proper manners beautifully," she replied with loving pride. "And you too, Timmy. You both used your napkins correctly, said please and thank you, and helped clear your plates without being asked. I suppose we can have small pieces of dessert to celebrate being together and having each other." Richard found himself leaning even further forward, completely captivated by their performance and the obvious, powerful love that bound this remarkable little family together against seemingly impossible odds. The depth of their connection, their unwavering loyalty to each other, and their determination to maintain hope and dignity in the face of crushing adversity was more inspiring than anything he'd encountered in decades of business success. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" Richard called softly across the small distance separating them, his voice carrying more raw emotion than he'd intended, completely betraying just how deeply their heartbreaking situation was affecting his already shattered heart and awakening feelings he'd thought were permanently buried with his late wife. Emma looked up from her careful pretend cake-cutting, her remarkable green eyes meeting his with surprising steadiness, maturity, and careful assessment that spoke to wisdom far beyond her years. There was no fear in her intelligent, penetrating gaze, only the kind of cautious wariness that comes from hard-won experience with adult disappointment, broken promises, and the harsh realities of a world that often failed to protect its most vulnerable citizens. She studied his face with the intensity of someone much older, as if trying to read his very soul for signs of trustworthiness, genuine kindness, or potential threat to her carefully protected family unit. "Our mama went to heaven exactly 6 months, 2 weeks, and 5 days ago," she said, with precise matter-of-factness that spoke to someone who'd been counting every single day since her world fell completely apart, her voice remaining remarkably steady despite the enormous magnitude of her devastating loss. "The cancer took her away from us, even though all the doctors promised they could make her better and bring her back to health. But before she left us forever, she made us solemnly promise to always take care of each other, no matter what terrible things happen to us in this world." The twins looked at their sister with complete trust, unwavering adoration, and absolute faith in her ability to protect and guide them, continuing to eat their elaborate pretend meal without missing a single beat. Their confidence in Emma's capability to handle any crisis was both deeply touching and utterly heartbreaking to witness. Richard felt his heart constrict painfully as the full weight and implications of their impossible situation began to sink into his consciousness like lead weights. These were not just homeless children, they were orphaned babies, trying to survive in one of the world's most expensive cities with nothing but love, imagination, and each other. Daddy went to look for work in California exactly 3 months ago because there weren't any good jobs left here in New York after his company went bankrupt and laid off all the employees, Emma continued with the same precise, factual tone that suggested she'd told this story many times before. "He promised he'd send for us as soon as he found something stable and good that could properly support our family. He swore he'd write letters every week and call whenever he could, but that was—" She paused, counting with mathematical precision on her small fingers. "Exactly 97 days ago today. I keep a special calendar, so I don't lose track of anything important. 97 days. Richard felt as if someone had delivered a devastating punch directly to his solar plexus, knocking all the air from his lungs and leaving him gasping. This incredible, brave little girl had been counting every single day since her father abandoned 3 small children completely alone in the cruel world, keeping meticulous track like a prisoner, marking days on a cold cell wall, each number representing another 24 hours of survival against impossible odds that would break most adults. The weight of that enormous responsibility, carried on such impossibly tiny shoulders, was almost unbearable to contemplate for anyone with a functioning heart and basic human decency. How was it possible that society had failed these innocent children so completely and utterly? How had the system supposedly designed to protect the most vulnerable members of our community allowed 3 helpless babies to slip through every crack, every safety net, every protection that civilized society claimed to provide its citizens? Richard stood slowly, his legs unsteady with overwhelming shock and emotion that threatened to buckle his knees and send him crashing to the ground in complete despair. His voice cracked with barely contained anguish, years of carefully constructed corporate composure crumbling like a house of cards in the face of such raw human suffering, as he asked desperately, "Who's taking care of you now? Surely there must be relatives somewhere in this city or beyond. grandparents, aunts, uncles, family friends, someone with a functioning conscience, ensuring you're safe and properly fed? There has to be some responsible adult looking out for your welfare and making sure you have basic human necessities like nutritious food, warm shelter, and proper medical care when you need it. Emma's delicate chin lifted with fierce pride and unshakable determination that reminded Richard of historical photographs he'd seen of young soldiers facing impossible odds with courage that defied human understanding and logic. Her remarkable green eyes blazed with inner fire that spoke of an indomitable spirit that poverty, abandonment, heartbreak, and society's systematic failures couldn't extinguish or diminish. He could see the incredible inner strength, wisdom, and resilience that was keeping this fragmented family together against circumstances that would completely destroy most adults, even those with resources, support systems, and years of life experience to draw upon. "I take care of us," Emma declared with quiet dignity, unwavering resolve, and absolute conviction that took Richard's breath away completely. Her voice carried natural authority that belonged to someone 3 times her age, speaking with the confidence and composure of a natural leader who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger, more determined, and more compassionate than before. "I'm the oldest, so it's my sacred responsibility and my greatest honor to protect Tommy and Timmy no matter what terrible things happen to us or how difficult our circumstances become. I know how to cook nutritious, balanced meals when we have food to cook, and I make absolutely sure the boys brush their teeth twice a day with the toothbrushes we got from the free clinic downtown, where the nice nurse lady teaches us about proper hygiene and basic health care." She gestured toward their surroundings with a graceful sweep of her small arm, encompassing not just the park, but their entire precarious existence, balanced precariously on the knife's edge between survival and disaster, hope and despair. "We say our prayers together every single night without fail, thanking God for keeping us together and asking Him to watch over Mama in heaven and maybe help Daddy find good work so he can come back for us someday. And I read to them before bed every night so they don't have nightmares about being hungry, cold, or scared of what tomorrow might bring us." Her voice took on a more practical, matter-of-fact tone as she continued, revealing the depth of her survival knowledge. "We live in Mrs. Peterson's basement apartment sometimes when it gets really cold, and she takes pity on us and lets us sleep on her old couch with the broken springs. She's not mean to us at all. She's actually very kind and gentle with a good heart, but she's 76 years old and doesn't have much money either since her husband Harold died last winter from pneumonia. Her monthly Social Security check barely covers her own groceries, heating bills, and heart medicine, so she can't afford to feed 3 extra mouths all the time, no matter how much her generous heart might want to help us survive and thrive. Sometimes the single word hit Richard like a devastating physical blow to his already battered soul, each syllable carrying the crushing weight of 1,000 sleepless nights, empty stomachs, and the constant fear that comes with having no safe place to call home in a world that seemed indifferent to their suffering. These innocent children were essentially homeless, huddled together in an unheated basement only when charity and human kindness allowed, surviving on pure imagination, unwavering determination, and the unbreakable bonds of family love that poverty, abandonment, and society's systemic indifference couldn't destroy or diminish, no matter how hard life tried to break their spirits. His financial disaster, losing nearly $1 billion in a single catastrophic day that had seemed like the end of the world just hours ago, suddenly seemed completely insignificant compared to their daily battle for basic survival, human dignity, and the simple hope that tomorrow might bring something better than the cruel indifference and systematic failures they faced every single day just by existing. What was money, after all, compared to the extraordinary courage these children showed simply by continuing to breathe, to hope, to love each other unconditionally, despite a world that had abandoned them? "What do you do for food?" Richard asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper, though he was genuinely afraid to hear the answer that would undoubtedly shatter his heart into even smaller, more painful pieces. The question hung in the air between them, like a bridge he wasn't sure he was emotionally strong enough to cross, but knew he had to traverse to truly understand their reality and the daily miracles of survival they performed. Emma's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment, like a candle flame struggling against a strong wind, revealing the scared, overwhelmed, desperately hungry 7-year-old child hidden beneath the brave facade she maintained constantly for her brother's emotional well-being and psychological survival. In that brief crack in her protective armor, Richard glimpsed the true cost of her remarkable strength, the bone-deep exhaustion that never fully left her, the fear that lived permanently in her chest, and the crushing weight of life-and-death decisions no child should ever have to make or even contemplate. Sometimes people at St. Mary's Catholic Church are kind and generous with their hearts and their leftover food, sharing their potluck dinner with us after Sunday evening services when we're brave enough to ask without feeling too ashamed of our circumstances, she began. Her voice steady, despite the humiliation such admissions must cause her naturally proud spirit and dignified character. Father Martinez always makes sure we get some of whatever they have available, even if it's just crackers and grape juice left over from communion. He never makes us feel bad about needing help, and he always says a special blessing for us and promises to keep us in his prayers. She continued, with the clinical precision and expert knowledge of someone who'd been forced to turn survival into a carefully studied science. Sometimes we find perfectly good food that restaurants and grocery stores throw away because it doesn't look perfect enough for paying customers. I know exactly which dumpsters behind which establishments have the freshest, safest leftovers and what times they put out their daily waste. I always inspect everything very carefully for spoilage, mold, strange smells, or any kind of contamination before giving even the smallest bite to Tommy and Timmy. I've taught myself about food safety by reading library books about nutrition, health, and proper food handling. The matter-of-fact way she discussed dumpster diving as a necessary survival strategy, spoken with the expertise and professional knowledge of a food safety inspector, made Richard's heart shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces that would never fully heal. This brilliant, remarkable child had been forced to become an expert in urban foraging, food safety protocols, risk assessment, and resource management at an age when she should have been worried about homework assignments, playground friendships, slumber parties, and which cartoons to watch on Saturday mornings. We also know which grocery stores throw away bread, fresh fruit and vegetables that are still perfectly good and nutritious but just don't look perfect enough for paying customers anymore. Emma continued, with the expertise and detailed knowledge of someone who'd made survival into a carefully studied science, requiring intelligence, planning, and constant vigilance. And there's a soup kitchen 6 blocks from here that serves hot, nutritious meals on Wednesdays and Saturdays, but we have to get there really early in the morning, sometimes before dawn, or they run out of food before we reach the front of the very long line. Sometimes we wait for 3 or 4 hours in all kinds of weather and still don't get fed because there are so many hungry people and not enough food or volunteers to help everyone who needs it. Richard felt physically ill, imagining these 3 precious babies standing in food lines with homeless adults, drug addicts, and mentally ill people, competing for basic nutrition and human dignity, learning the harsh arithmetic of scarcity and desperation before they'd even mastered their multiplication tables or learned to read chapter books. The injustice of it all, Innocent children going hungry while he'd spent years worrying about stock prices, board meetings, quarterly profit margins, and corporate politics, created a burning sensation in his chest that felt like his heart was literally breaking apart and reforming into something completely different and more human. "What are you eating for your pretend dinner today?" Richard asked gently, stepping closer to their sacred circle while being extraordinarily careful not to disrupt the precious magic they had created in their small corner of the world. He desperately needed to shift the conversation towards something that might bring back Emma's radiant smile and restore some lightness to her burdened spirit, even if only temporarily, because watching her carry such adult responsibilities was breaking his heart. Emma's face immediately lit up with genuine enthusiasm and infectious joy that seemed to emanate from her very soul, her remarkable imagination effortlessly transforming their desperate circumstances into something beautiful, hopeful, and wonderfully life-affirming. The transformation was so complete and sudden that it took Richard's breath away, like watching the sun break through the darkest storm clouds after the longest, coldest night of winter, bringing warmth and hope back to a frozen world. Tonight, we're having perfectly seasoned roast chicken with golden crispy skin that crackles when you bite it, creamy mashed potatoes whipped with real butter and just a touch of cream, fresh green beans with slivered almonds, and just a hint of garlic and lemon. Warm dinner rolls that are still steaming from the oven with honey butter melting on top, she announced with the enthusiasm and detailed knowledge of a master chef describing her finest culinary creation to important dinner guests. Her eyes sparkled with pure joy as she continued, "And we have a colorful garden salad with ripe red tomatoes, crisp cucumbers, sweet bell peppers, and fresh lettuce with homemade ranch dressing that Mama used to make." She pointed to her brother's gap-toothed grin with obvious pride, unconditional love, and sisterly affection that spoke eloquently to the deep bonds holding this remarkable family together against odds that would have broken most adults with far more resources and advantages. And for dessert, we have a magnificent 3-layer chocolate cake with rich vanilla buttercream frosting, rainbow sprinkles, and vanilla ice cream on the side, because Tommy lost his very first tooth yesterday, and that's definitely worth celebrating in the grandest style possible, don't you think? The way she made losing a tooth into a celebration worthy of a holiday, finding joy and meaning in the smallest milestones while living in grinding poverty, revealed a wisdom about happiness and contentment that most people spent entire lifetimes trying to understand and never quite achieved. "That sounds absolutely delicious, nutritionally balanced, and prepared with obvious love and care," Richard said, his voice thick with barely controlled emotion and genuine admiration for her creativity, resilience, and remarkable ability to create beauty, hope, and celebration in the midst of despair and hardship. "It's been a very long time, far too long, since I've enjoyed a genuine home-cooked meal like that, surrounded by people who truly care about each other unconditionally and find real joy in simply being together as a loving family, sharing stories and making precious memories." The children exchanged meaningful glances, conducting a silent conversation that spoke to their deep spiritual connection and shared experiences surviving impossible hardships together as a united team. Years of depending only on each other for survival, comfort, protection, and hope had created a form of communication that transcended words, a telepathic understanding born of absolute necessity and strengthened by unbreakable love that would last their entire lives and bind them together forever. Emma studied Richard's face with intense concentration and careful scrutiny, her intelligent green eyes seeming to search his very soul for signs of trustworthiness, genuine kindness, authentic goodness, and most importantly, any potential threat to her family's safety and well-being. Her evaluation was thorough and professional, like a skilled detective gathering crucial evidence for a life-or-death case, and Richard found himself hoping desperately that he would pass whatever complex test she was conducting with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of careful evaluation and internal deliberation, she nodded solemnly with the gravity and diplomatic wisdom of someone making an important decision that could fundamentally affect their family's future, well-being, and survival prospects. "You may join us for dinner, Mr. Blackstone, but you'll have to bring your own plate and silverware because we only have 3 sets, and we absolutely cannot share because of germs and proper hygiene protocols that could make us sick. Mama taught us very thoroughly about preventing illness and staying as healthy as possible, especially when you don't have money for doctors, medicine, or expensive hospital visits." Richard pretended to pull elegant fine china dinnerware and sterling silver utensils from his jacket pocket with theatrical flair and exaggerated formality that made both twins giggle with pure delight and childish wonder that transformed their faces into pictures of innocent happiness. Their laughter was like the most beautiful music he'd ever heard, innocent, joyful, and utterly infectious, reminding him of sounds and feelings he'd forgotten could exist in a world so often filled with pain, disappointment, and heartbreak. He settled cross-legged on the cold ground in his expensive tailored suit, completely unconcerned about grass stains, dirt, mud, or the curious looks from other park visitors who couldn't understand what a wealthy businessman was doing, having an elaborate imaginary picnic with 3 obviously homeless children. Nothing else in the world mattered except this moment, this connection, this glimpse of pure humanity that was healing something fundamental that had been broken inside his soul for years. "Thank you for welcoming me to your table with such graciousness and hospitality," he said with formal dignity that matched their own ceremonial approach to their survival ritual. "It's a tremendous honor and privilege sharing this magnificent meal with such gracious hosts who clearly understand the true meaning of hospitality, generosity, and unconditional family love." As their elaborate pretense continued with meticulous attention to every detail, from proper napkin placement to sharing imaginary salt and pepper, Richard watched Emma with growing amazement, profound recognition, and deep respect that bordered on reverence and awe. Despite her impossible circumstances and the crushing weight of responsibility she carried every moment of every day, Emma demonstrated intelligence, natural leadership ability, emotional maturity, and wisdom that took his breath away and reminded him of his own driven younger self, but with infinitely more compassion, genuine understanding of human nature, and crystal-clear priorities about what truly mattered in life. She possessed everything he'd lost along his climb to corporate success: heart, soul, moral compass, and the ability to lead through love rather than fear. She corrected her brother's grammar gently but consistently, turning every conversation into a valuable learning opportunity without ever making them feel criticized, embarrassed, or inadequate about their knowledge or abilities. She helped them with simple arithmetic problems involving their imaginary food portions, teaching mathematical concepts through play and practical application that would make any professional educator proud and impressed. Most remarkably, she maintained a running commentary about nutrition, proper table manners, gratitude for life's blessings both large and small, and the critical importance of family unity and mutual support that would have impressed any child development expert, educational psychologist, or family therapist with years of training and experience. More importantly than all her intellectual gifts and natural teaching ability, she did everything with unconditional love, infinite patience, and unwavering dedication to her brother's physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. This wasn't merely survival or going through the motions. This was a child raising children with more wisdom, grace, genuine caring, and sophisticated understanding of human development than many adults Richard had encountered throughout his successful but emotionally empty corporate career. Every interaction revealed layers of depth that shouldn't exist in someone so young. She anticipated her brother's needs before they expressed them, redirected potential conflicts with diplomacy that would impress United Nations negotiators, and maintained hope and optimism that seemed to spring from an inexhaustible well of inner strength and determination. "Emma, do you attend school regularly?" Richard asked carefully, not wanting to break the magical spell of their dinner party, but desperately needing to understand more about this extraordinary child's educational background, intellectual capabilities, and the tragic circumstances that had interrupted her academic development and stolen her chance at the education she so clearly deserved and needed to reach her full potential. Her bright, animated expression dimmed slightly like clouds passing over the sun at midday, and he immediately regretted asking such a potentially painful question that might remind her of everything she'd lost and all the opportunities that had been stolen from her through no fault of her own. "Not currently," she admitted with obvious regret, longing, and a maturity that broke his heart into smaller pieces. "We used to go to PS 163 before Mama got really sick with the cancer that eventually took her away from us, and everything in our lives changed completely and forever." Her voice took on a wistful quality as she continued, "I loved school more than anything else in the whole world, especially advanced mathematics, literature and creative writing, earth science and art class, where I could express my creativity. My teacher, Miss Jennifer Robinson, said I was exceptionally gifted intellectually and that I should be enrolled in the district's accelerated programs for academically talented students. She said I had the kind of mind that comes along maybe once in a teacher's entire career." She reached for a small, battered backpack beside the tree, handling it like precious treasure containing all her most valued worldly possessions and connections to the life she'd lost. The care with which she touched it, the reverence in her movements, revealed how much these few items meant to her. "Miss Jennifer gave me some very special books to keep when we had to move out of our apartment after Mama died, and we couldn't pay the rent anymore," Emma continued, her voice soft with memory and deep gratitude that hadn't been diminished by hardship or disappointment. "She said these books were mine forever, no matter what happened to us, and that learning was something nobody could ever take away from me as long as I kept reading, thinking, and asking questions about the world around us and how things work." She carefully opened the worn backpack and showed Richard a small collection of books, each one obviously treasured and read countless times until the pages were soft with handling and love. The titles ranged from classic children's literature to beginner science texts, to mathematics workbooks far above her grade level, revealing both her advanced capabilities and her hunger for knowledge. "I read to Tommy and Timmy every single night before bed, without exception, no matter how tired, hungry, or scared we might be. It helps them sleep better, forget about being hungry, and remember that there are beautiful stories and wonderful possibilities in the world beyond our current difficult circumstances." Her eyes lit up with pure joy as she continued, "We're currently reading Charlotte's Web for the third time, and they still love hearing about the friendship between Wilbur the pig and Charlotte the spider. They ask such thoughtful, deep questions about loyalty, sacrifice, death, and what it means to be a true friend. Sometimes their questions are so profound and philosophical that I have to think very hard about how to answer them properly and honestly without scaring them or taking away their innocence and hope." Richard felt something profound stirring in his chest. Not just overwhelming sympathy and heartbreak, but deep recognition, genuine respect, and dawning understanding that this child possessed something truly extraordinary and rare. This remarkable girl had qualities and insights that he'd lost somewhere along his relentless climb to financial success and social status. She had pure resilience that couldn't be taught in any business school, unshakable determination that came from character rather than ambition, and the rare ability to find genuine joy and meaning in life's simplest pleasures and human connections. Most importantly, she possessed the extraordinary capacity to lead through love, inspiration, and selfless service to others, rather than through fear, manipulation, intimidation, or the ruthless pursuit of personal power and wealth. She was, quite simply, the most naturally gifted leader he'd ever encountered in decades of corporate life, and she was only 7 years old. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Emma?" He asked with sincere curiosity and deep interest in the dreams and aspirations that sustained her through such unimaginable hardship and daily challenges that would break most adults with resources and support systems. Emma's remarkable green eyes sparkled with passionate intensity and clear vision that Richard hadn't felt about anything in his own life for many years. "I want to be a teacher just like Miss Jennifer, so I can help other children discover how wonderful learning can be and show them that education is the key to changing their circumstances," she said with unshakable conviction. "Or maybe an engineer or computer scientist, someone who helps fix broken things and solves important problems that make life better for everyone, especially people who don't have much money or power to help themselves. There are so many broken things in the world that desperately need fixing, don't you think, Mr. Blackstone?" The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and purple. Other families were heading home to warm houses and full refrigerators, but Emma and her brothers remained in their magical circle where love could fill empty stomachs and hope could sustain them through another night.